Hi, it's Miss Vital. This podcast is on invertebrates and it is meant for AP Biology. There are over 1 million species of animals known. There are about 35 phyla. We're going to concentrate on 15. Animals inhabit all environments on Earth. Most phyla have mainly aquatic species. Vertebrates are animals with backbones. They make up less than 5% of animals. Basically, they're all the animals that have bones. Invertebrates are animals that lack bones. The first group of invertebrates we're going to talk about are sponges, and they belong to the Parazoa phylum. Their lineage is closest to the ancestral protists of animals. Their cells are unspecialized, which makes them basal animals. They have no real tissues. It's one of the things that makes them very different from other animals. They are in the phylum Porifera. They are sessile, which means they are permanently attached. They do not have nerves or muscles, but they do have individual cells that sense and react to the environment. Sponges can be small, about 1 centimeter, or as large as 2 meters or over 6 feet. There's over 9,000 different species, and most of these are marine or saltwater. The spongiocele is the central cavity. The osculum is where water flows out at the top. Sponges are filter feeders, and their bodies oftentimes are described as being vase-like. They have chanocytes, which are collar cells. These collar cells are similar to flagellated protists that animals evolved from, therefore they are evidence of evolution. The collar cells have a flagella that create a water current and draws water into the body of the sponge. The collar around the collar cells traps food particles. Mesohyl is the gelatinous region inside the wall of the sponge. Also inside the wall of the sponge are amoebocytes that move around using pseudopods. They digest and carry nutrients. Amoebocytes also form spicules, which are hard needle-like structures, and they can form spongin, which are collagen proteins that make up flexible fibers. Most sponges are hermaphrodites. That means that they produce male and female gametes, the sperm and the egg. Usually, hermaphrodites do not mate with themselves. Two hermaphrodites come together and exchange sperm to fertilize each other's eggs. Collar cells and amoebocytes in the sponges produce the gametes. The eggs stay in the mesohyl, but the sperm leave and fertilize a neighboring sponge. The zygotes have flagella and swim away to grow elsewhere. Sponges can also regenerate, which is a type of asexual reproduction. There are two groups, or two phyla, with radial symmetry. The two of them formerly belonged to a clade called Radiata. They don't really use that term anymore. But these are animals with radial symmetry and diploblastic embryos, meaning that they have no mesoderm in their embryos. And the two phyla are Cnidarian and Ctenophores. Cnidarians include hydra, jellyfish, sea anemones, and coral. There's over 10,000 living species, and most of these are marine. They have a gastrovascular cavity, which is a central digestive compartment. It has one opening that acts as the mouth and the anus. There are two variations of body plans in cnidarians. The first are the polyp. These are sessile, and they form a cylinder with tentacles on the top. The tentacles capture prey. Hydra and sea anemones are example of polyp forms. The medusa is a free-floating, flattened form. The mouth faces down. It floats and is capable of contracting. The jellyfish is an example of a medusa. Some cnidarians only have one body plan, others have both in their life cycles. The tentacles have cnidocytes. These are stinging cells that help to capture prey. The cnidocytes contain nematocysts, which are exploding capsules in the cnidocytes with long threads that penetrate the prey. Cnidarians have a simple nerve net for sensory reception and simple muscles, which are basically bundles of microfilaments that make up contractile fibers. There are 4 classes of cnidarians. the Anthozoa, the Hydrozoa, the Cubozoa, and the Scyphozoa. The other group or phylum with radial symmetry are the ctenophores. These are comb jellies. There's only about 100 species, and they tend to be small, 1 to 10 centimeters wide. However, they are the largest animals to use cilia for locomotion. They have 8 rows of comb-like plates made of fused cilia, and they have 2 long retractable tentacles with colloblasts that are adhesive structures that help them capture food. All of the rest of the animal phyla belong in the Bilateria clade. Bilateria are animals with bilateral symmetry. That means that they have a central longitudinal plane that divides the body in 2 equal but opposite halves. There used to be 2 clades, now there are 3 clades. The Protosomia was a clade that has now been divided into the Ecdytozoans and the LOPHOTROCHOZOANS. The Deuterostome clade still exists. We're going to start with the LOPHOTROCHOZOANS, the first clade of Bilaterians. And the first phylum that falls into this group is Platyhelminthes. These are flatworms. There are 20,000 species. They can be marine or saltwater, freshwater, or terrestrial. So they basically live in all types of environments. Some are free living and some are parasitic. They can be microscopic or they can be 20 meters long, which is over 60 feet. They are triploblastic, as are all of the animals in the Bilateria clade. Triploblastic means that the embryo has a mesoderm, and the mesoderm is going to develop into complex organs and true muscle tissue. Flatworms are acoelomates, meaning they lack a body cavity. There are 4 classes of flatworms, and the first one that we're going to talk about are the Turbellarians. These are mainly marine and free living. Planarians are a common turbellarian, so we're going to use that as an example. They are in the genus Digestia. They are found in ponds and streams. Planarians are carnivores. They eat smaller animals and dead animals. Flatworms lack organs for gas exchange and circulation. Because they are flat, all the cells are close to the surface, so exchange of gas occurs through the cell membranes. If we look at the diagram of the planarian, you'll see that it has a mouth where a pharynx comes out. The pharynx extends through the mouth, it is muscular, and it sucks up food and excretes waste. They also have a gastrovascular cavity, which is where digestion occurred, and it is branched for extensive surface area. They have ventral nerve cores, which means they run along the underside of the body. They have a simple excretory system consisting of protonephridia, which is made of flame cells. Those are ciliated. They maintain the osmotic balance with the environment. They have branched ducts that open to the outside. They also have ganglia, which is a dense cluster of nerve cells. They can modify responses to stimuli. It's not really a brain, it's just a grouping of nerve cells. And they have eye spots which detect light. Planarians move via cilia on their ventral epidermis. They glide along slime they secrete. They reproduce asexually through regeneration and sexually through copulation. They are also hermaphrodites. The next 2 phyla we're going to put together, the Monogenea and the Trematoda. The trematodes are parasitic flukes. They have suckers for attaching to the host, and they have a tough covering which protects them. Blood flukes are an example of trematodes, and one specific example is the schistosoma. 200 million people worldwide are infected with schistosoma. It causes body pains, anemia, and dysentery. If you look at the diagram of schistosoma, you'll see that what happens is a person excretes eggs when they're infected with this worm in their feces. That winds up in the water and it hatches into a premature larvae. That larvae, the Myristidia, finds a snail living in the water and burrows into the snail's body. Then what happens is, while it's inside, it develops 2 generations of spore cysts. They are released and they're called cercaria, and they mature into another larvae, which finds a person and literally burrows right through their skin and enters their blood system. They then mature and travel to the liver, where adults will mate and produce more eggs. Monogenes are mainly external parasites of fishes. The next class is Cestoidea, and again, we're still talking about flatworms here. These are parasitic tapeworms, and they usually live in vertebrates. If we look here, the scolex is the head of the tapeworm, and it has suckers and hooks. It helps the worm to lock onto the lining of the intestine. The rest of the body is made of proglottids. Those are units that contain sex organs and thousands of fertilized eggs. They have no digestive tract because they absorb food that's pre-digested by the host. The proglottids are shed in the feces. So in the example of a tapeworm, proglottids are shed in the feces. Another cow comes along and eats the grass with the proglottids in it. They develop into larvae and travel through the blood into the muscle. In the muscle, they form a cyst. When we eat beef, we're eating the muscle of a cow. So when humans eat the meat, the cyst develops into a mature adult. They can be over 20 meters long. They can block the intestine, rob individuals of nutrients, but there is a drug called niclosamide which kills the worm. It's an oral drug. The next phylum are the rotifers. Rotifers are Latin for wheel bearers. They are pseudocoelomates with jaws, crowns of cilia, and complete digestive tracts. There's about 1,800 species, and they're very, very small, 0.05 to 2.0 millimeters. They are mainly in fresh water. Again, this is a new phylum. These are not flatworms. A complete digestive tract means that they have a separate mouth and anus. It's also called an alimentary tract or an alimentary canal. The mouth leads to the pharynx, which has jaws that grind food. Their food are microorganisms. The crown of cilia around the mouth draws water in. The fluid in the pseudocoelom, which is a partially lined body cavity, transports nutrients and wastes. So in this case, their digestive system also functions as a circulatory system. Some rotifers reproduce via parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is when females produce females from unfertilized eggs. It is a type of asexual cloning. The next phylum are the ECTOPROCTS. These were formerly known as Bryozoans. These are lophophorate animals. They have the lophophore, which is a horseshoe-shaped fold of body wall that has ciliated tentacles that surround the mouth, which draws water towards the mouth and traps food. They also have true coeloms lined with the mesoderm. They tend to be colonial animals with hard ectoskeletons. Those ectoskeletons have pores, so they stick their lophophores out. They are sessile, and there's about 5,000 species, some of which are important reef builders. The next phylum are the Brachiopods. These are also lophophorate animals. They're called lampshells. They look like clams, but they're sessile. They're attached by a stalk, and all of them are marine. There's only about 330 species, but there are 30,000 fossilized species, so we commonly find these in the fossil record. The next phylum is the mollusks. Mollusks include snails, slugs, oysters, clams, octopus, squid, and there's 150,000 species. Most of them are marine, and they tend to have soft bodies, usually protected by hard shells made of calcium carbonate. All mollusks have a similar body plan. The muscular foot is for movement. The visceral mass contains all of the internal organs, and if you're eating something like an oyster or a clam, you're eating the visceral mass. The mantle is a fold of tissue that drapes over the visceral mass, and the mantle secretes the shell. The mantle cavity houses the gills, the anus, and the excretory pores. And the radula is a rasping organ for feeding, which basically is used for scraping algae in some mollusks. Most mollusks have separate sexes. Many have atrophophore larvae. Most have open circulatory systems, and nephridia, which is their excretory organs. Remember, the excretory system maintains water balance and removes metabolic waste. The first class we're going to talk about are the chitons, which are the polyplacophores. These guys tend to be oval-shaped with shells that have 8 dorsal plates. They cling to rocks along the shoreline, and their foot acts as a suction cup. They have a radula that scrapes algae. The next group of mollusks are the gastropods. This is the largest class of mollusks. There's over 40,000 living species. Most are marine. They exhibit something called torsion. During embryonic development, an asymmetrical muscle forms. This causes uneven growth, and the visceral mass rotates about 180 degrees, so the anus and the mantle cavity are above the head. Most gastropods have one shell. Snails are gastropods, but they lack gills. Instead, the lining of their mantle cavity acts as a lung and exchanges gas. The next class are the bivalves. They have 2 shells. Clams, oysters, scallops, and mussels are examples. Most are suspension feeders. They trap food particles in the mucus of the gills, and they have cilia that sweep the food into the mouth. Water enters the mouth via an in-current siphon and exits via an ex-current siphon. The next class are the cephalopods. These include squid, octopus, cuttlefish, and nautilus. They have a beak-like jaw to bite their prey. Their mouth is surrounded by tentacles. Squid have an internal shell. Octopus have no shell. The giant squid is the largest invertebrate. It can be up to 17 meters and 2 tons. Cephalopods are the only mollusk with closed circulatory systems. They also have a complex brain. The octopus is the smartest invertebrate. The next phylum are annelids. These are segmented worms. The term annelid means little rings. There's about 15,000 species, and they range from 1 millimeter to 3 meters. The giant Australian earthworm can be up to 10 feet long. They live in all types of habitats. The coelom is partitioned by septa. The septa are dividing walls that are penetrated by the digestive tract, the blood vessels, and the nerve cord. The digestive tract includes the pharynx, the esophagus, the crop, the gizzard, and the intestine. Food enters the pharynx, then moves through the esophagus to the crop where it is stored, and the gizzard where it is ground up. They have a closed circulatory system with 5 aortic arches that pump blood. The oxygen is carried in hemoglobin, just like it is in vertebrates. Their skin functions as their respiratory system. They have to stay wet in order for oxygen and CO2 to diffuse across their skin. Metanephridia is their excretory system, and it removes waste from the blood and the body fluid. There is a pair of metanephridia in each segment, and they lead to exterior pores. They have a cerebral ganglia, which is a pair of nerves. It is a simple brain. Earthworms are also hermaphrodites. Again, 2 of them line up and exchange sperm. The clitellum is that thick band that you see on the outside of an earthworm, and it is a special organ that secretes a mucus cocoon. It slides along the worm, picking up eggs and storing sperm. The cocoon slips off the worm and remains in the soil where embryos develop. They can also reproduce asexually via regeneration. There are 3 classes of annelids. The first class, the OLIGOCHAETA, are earthworms and some aquatic species. They eat soil, therefore tilling the earth. Their secretions are covered with castings, which actually improve the soil texture. 1 acre of farmland can have 50,000 earthworms, which equals 18 tons of casting per year. Farmers love them. They also aerate the soil. The next class are the Polychaetas, and these are mainly marine worms. They have many setae, which are bristles for movement made of chitin, and they have parapodia, which are paddle-like structures for movement, more like ridges. They have many of them, and they also function as gills because they're highly vascularized. In other words, they have a lot of blood vessels in them. And the last class contain the leeches. Leeches can be 1 to 30 centimeters long. 30 centimeters is about a foot. Some have blade-like jaws that slit the skin. They secrete enzymes that digest the whole, and they also secrete an anesthetic and an anticoagulant called HIRUDINEA. They used to be used for bloodletting. They are presently used for treating bruised tissue and stimulating circulation to fingers or toes that have been sewn back on after an accident. There are 2 evolutionary adaptations that are well developed in annelids. The coelom, which is the fully lined body cavity, provides hydrostatic skeleton, which allows for new and diverse methods of locomotion. It also provides the body space for storage and complex organ development, and it cushions internal structures. The coelom functions separation of the body walls, and then muscles for moving and internal organs. For example, movement of the digestive tract. The second adaptation in annelids that is important is segmentation. This allows for specialization of body regions. Groups of segments are modified for different functions. The next animal phylum is the nematodes. These are the roundworms. 1 shovel of soil can contain over 1 million nematodes. Many of them are microscopic. They are non-segmented, they are cylindrical, and they have a pseudocoelom. They are also covered with a tough cuticle that they shed when they grow. They're found in all environments. 90,000 different species are known, and that the actual number may be 10 times that. They can be a millimeter or a meter. They have a complex digestive tract. There are separate sexes in most species. They do internal fertilization, so the female can produce about 100,000 fertilized eggs at a time. The zygotes are resistant to harsh conditions. There are free-living nematodes that are important decomposers who recycle nutrients. Some nematodes are also important agricultural pests that attack plant roots, and some nematodes are parasitic to animals. Hookworms and pinworms are common parasites in people, and in fact the pinworm is the most common internal parasite in the United States. Puppy roundworms are also in this group, and Trichinella spiroideus causes a parasitic infection called trichinosis, which can be from eating undercooked pork. The next phylum are the arthropods. Arthropods are segmented, so they have specialized areas for a great variety of functions. They are coelomates with a fully lined body cavity. They have exoskeletons with chitin, and they have jointed appendages. There are 10 to the 18th, which is a billion arthropods worldwide. There's over 1 million different species. 2/3 of all animals are arthropods, and they are found in all habitats on Earth. Based on diversity, distribution, and sheer number, arthropods are the most successful animal phyla. They have a cuticle. The exoskeleton is made of protein and chitin. The cuticle may be thick and hard or thin and flexible. It provides protection. It provides points of attachment for muscles. It is strong and water resistant and prevents them from drying out. When they molt, they shed their old exoskeleton and secrete a larger one. This expends a lot of energy and can leave the animal vulnerable. Arthropods are highly cephalized. They have well-developed sense organs. They have an open circulatory system which contains a fluid called hemolymph. Hemolymph is pushed by the heart into short arteries, then into sinuses, which are spaces around tissues and organs. The hemolymph returns to the heart via pores with valves. Sinuses in the body are called hemocoels. They are not part of the coelom. A hemocoel is the main body cavity in adult arthropods. The coelom is therefore reduced. Arthropods evolved and diverged into 4 living branches. Trilobites are extinct, but the 4 living branches are chelicerates, which include horseshoe crabs, scorpions, ticks, spiders, and extinct Eurypodids. Chelicerates have claw-like feeding appendages called chelicerae. Myriapods, which include centipedes and millipedes. Hexapods, which include insects. And crustaceans, which include crabs, lobsters, shrimp, and barnacles. Myriapods have jaw-like mandibles, compound eyes, and 1 or 2 pairs of antennae. The exoskeleton was largely responsible for arthropods moving onto land, preventing water loss and providing structural support. The oldest terrestrial chelicerae and arachnid fossils are 450 million years old. The old classification system had 1 phylum, the Arthropoda, but now the 4 phylum that I just mentioned, the myriapods, the chelicerates, the hexapods, and the crustaceans, are the 4 living phyla. And those 4 new phyla are based on cladistic analysis and molecular systematics. Trilobites are extinct, but they were common in the shallow seas of the Paleozoic era. The great Permian extinctions that ended the Paleozoic era that caused their extinction was about 250 million years ago. Chelicerates have chelicerae, which are pincers or fangs for feeding. Eurypterids are water scorpions, and they were the early chelicerae that are now extinct. They were found in marine and fresh water, and they could be up to 3 meters long. They had more specialized appendages than trilobites. There are only 4 marine species of chelicerates remaining. One is the horseshoe crab, which is considered a living fossil because it has changed little in hundreds of millions of years. It is common on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the U.S. Most modern chelicerates are in the class arachnid. They include scorpions, spiders, ticks, and mites. Ticks are blood-sucking parasites. They contain a cephalothorax, which is a fused head and chest region. There are 6 pairs of appendages. The first are the chelicerae, which are claw-like for feeding. Oftentimes they are fangs. Some spiders have poison to attack their prey. The second are the pedipalps. They are for sensing or feeding. And the next 4 pairs are walking legs. As the chelicerate chews, the spider secretes digestive juices, which softens their food, and the spider sucks up the liquid meal. They have book lungs for gas exchange in spiders. They are stacked plates with internal chambers. They have an extensive surface area. The exchange of CO2 and oxygen between the hemolymph and the air occurs here. Many spiders produce silk. This is a liquid protein produced by silk glands in the abdomen. Spinnerets, which are special organs, spin the silk into solid fibers as it exits the body. Web weaving is inherited. Some spiders are hunters. They have heavier legs and better eyes. Myriapods have a pair of antennae and 3 pairs of mouth parts, including jaw-like mandibles. Millipedes, which were in the class Diplopoda, are worm-like with a large number of legs. They have 2 pairs of legs per segment. So they're sometimes called 1,000-leggers, but they don't have 1,000 legs. They eat dead and organic matter, like decaying leaves. Centipedes used to be in the class Chilopoda, and they are terrestrial carnivores. They only have 1 pair of legs per segment. They have poison claws on the first segment to paralyze the prey and act as a defense. The class Insecta outnumber all other forms of life combined. They are rare in the seas. They're divided into 26 orders. Entomology is the study of insects. The oldest fossil is 400 million years old, from the Devonian period. The greatest diversification of insects occurred with the radiation of flowering plants during the Cretaceous and Tertiary periods, about 60 to 65 million years ago. There's new evidence that suggests that insect diversification may have been more of a cause of angiosperm radiation than an effect. Flight is one key to the success of insects. It helps them to escape predators, find food and mates, disperse to new habitats faster. Wings are extensions of the cuticles. They are not appendages, and they usually have one or two pairs. Insect wings may have began as extensions of the cuticle to absorb heat, or maybe to glide from a plant to the ground, or began as extensions for swimming. Dragonflies were the first insects to fly. If we look at the internal anatomy of an insect, they have a complete digestive system with specialized regions. They have an open circulatory system. The heart pumps hemolymph through sinuses of the hemocoel. They have Malpighian tubules, which are unique excretory organs. They are made of outpocketings of the digestive system. And they have a tracheal system for gas exchange. These are branched chitin-lined tubes that infiltrate the body and carry oxygen directly to the cells. They open to the outside via spiracles, which are pores that open and close, so they regulate the air and water loss. Their nervous system is a pair of ventral nerve cords with several segmented ganglia. Two cords meet in the head. The ganglia are fused into a cerebral ganglion, which is a brain, close to the antenna and eyes. Insects either undergo incomplete metamorphosis or complete metamorphosis. Incomplete metamorphosis is when the young looks like the adult, and it goes through several molts to reach the adult size and proportions. So the egg hatches into a nymph, which grows into an adult. Complete metamorphosis is the larval stage, which is specialized for eating and growing. Maggots and caterpillars are examples of the larvae. They don't look like the adult. So the egg hatches into a larvae, which then goes into the pupal stage, which is in the cocoon, and then emerges as the adult. Most insects reproduce sexually with separate male and females, and they have internal fertilization. Crustaceans are mostly aquatic. There's about 40,000 species. There's crabs, lobsters, crayfish, and shrimp. They have multiple specialized appendages. Only arthropods. They are the only arthropods with two pairs of appendages modified as mouth parts. They have walking legs on the thorax. Appendages also are present on the abdomen like insects, and they can regenerate lost appendages. They have an open circulatory system and separate sexes. Lobsters and crayfish have special appendages to transfer sperm to reproductive pores of the female. Isopods are one of the largest groups of crustaceans. They mainly live in dark terrestrial environments. There's about 10,000 species, mostly marine, but include pill bugs like woodlice and sow bugs. Copepods are important in plankton. They are the smallest crustaceans. They eat protists and bacteria and are eaten by many fish. Decapods include lobster, crayfish, crabs, shrimp. They have 10 walking legs. They are the larger crustaceans. Their cuticle or exoskeleton is hardened by calcium carbonate. The carapace is the portion of the exoskeleton that covers the dorsal side of the cephalothorax and acts as a shield. Most of these are marine except crayfish. Barnacles are sessile crustaceans. They are in a group called Cerapeds. They strain food from the water. If we look at how many times segmentation evolved in the animal kingdom, the arthropod's key anatomical characteristic is segmentation. Until recently, biologists favored the hypothesis that arthropods evolved from annelids. Molecular systematics has changed the close relationship between arthropods and annelids. The debate has focused on the origin of segmentation. Segmentation is due to the blocking out of an embryo into regions where certain body parts will develop. Certain genes determine segmentation. Then Hox genes determine what organs will develop at each segment. Hox genes predate the origin of bilaterians. Development of segmented bodies dates back to the first animals. An increase in Hox gene number and the adaptation of Hox genes function for development of segmented bodies made it possible for a great diversity of complex animals to evolve. There are 3 different hypotheses that account for the scattered distribution of segmentation in the animal phylogenetic tree. The first hypothesis is that the segmentation had separate evolutionary origins. The second is that there were 2 separate origins of segmentation, one for protostomes and one for deuterostomes. And the third is that segmentation has evolved once in an ancestor common to all three bilateral lineages. The next phylum are the echinoderms. These include starfish, sea urchins, and sand dollars. Echinoderms have a water vascular system and secondary radial anatomy. They are sessile or slow-moving, and they are all marine, about 7,000 species. They have internal and external radial symmetry, often with 5 spokes, but they have bilateral symmetry in their larvae. There's a thin skin that covers the hard calcareous plates. Most are prickly or spiny. They are classified by a water vascular system, which is a network of hydraulic canals that branch into extensions called tube feet. They function in movement, feeding, and gas exchange. Echinoderms are bilaterians and are not related to cnidarians. Echinoderms larvae, as I said, has a bilateral symmetry. The radial anatomy of the adults is an adaptation to their sessile lifestyle. Adult echinoderms are not truly radial. The opening, called the madreporite of sea stars, is where the water vascular system takes in water and it is off to one side. The first class includes the sea stars, and they have 5 arms which radiate from a central disc. Tube feet act as suction cups to move and catch prey. They usually eat things like clams and oysters. It turns its stomach inside out, pushing it through its mouth and in between the shells of the clam. They secrete digestive juices and digest the organs of the clam with their stomach inside out. They are also capable of regeneration. The next class includes the brittle stars. They have a distinctive central disc with long, flexible, thin arms. They do not have suction or tube feet. They move by lashing their arms. The next class includes sand dollars, which are flat and disc-shaped, and sea urchins that have muscles that move spines. Their mouth has jaw-like structures. They eat seaweed, and they're spherical. This group does not have tube feet. The next group includes sea lilies, which are attached to the bottom of the ocean by a stalk, and feather stars, which crawl along with long arms. And the sea cucumbers lack spines, and their exoskeleton is reduced.